or I wanted to take an opportunity to answer a few questions that we've had come through the Q&A for Deputy Manager over at the city. The first question that we had to come through either through the chat or through registration was, what steps will leaders take to ensure that successful Durham community-based organizations in marginalized communities have equity and access to these funds?
So thank you. I've mentioned a couple of those. I mean, I was responding to one of the chat questions, another chat question when you asked me that, but we really are focused on making sure that we reach out to all neighborhoods and our residents. We had engagement events. That's why we partnered with NCCU, because of the students there, as well as the community in which the university is located. We also made sure that we advertise, our budget healing, as we call them, events in the local newspaper, as well as Spectacular Magazine. We kept the website open the entire time. We reached out. One of the questions was about the survey. The survey went out to anyone we had contact information with who had participated in any of our other engagement events, whether it be participatory budgeting, the comp plan work, working with our neighborhood improvement services department. I think we sent out surveys, over 4,000 email accounts that we had in our system. And we continue to engage with those residents at our budget healing events. We also asked those folks there to complete the survey. And we also, if they did not complete it then, we sent out a communication to them, asking them to complete it after the fact. And we also asked them to let us know if they were interested in being on one of our review teams. And so, we've reached out in many, many ways. I'm sure there are many ways we can continue to reach out to make sure that our residents engage. We are collecting demographic information on any of our participants based on race, age, in terms of whether they participate on a review panel or they submit a proposal, but also where they live in the Durham County community. So we are trying to make sure and ensure that we know where our residents come from, we know who they are, and we know that all of our demographics are covered.
Thank you so much, Deputy Manager Johnson. Manager Hager, we also had a question for you from registration that said, will support be provided to those organizations that are awarded federal funds to help actually support with different federal requirements? And a follow-up to that was, in the next round, will support be available to community organizations who want to apply but may not have experience with federal funding?
That's a great question. If those of you who know my background, it's in finance and compliance and a whole lot of other areas that keeps that in the forefront. We all try as best we can to support partner agencies. Our challenge often is our bandwidth within county government to support others. Those who are funded or will be funded will be supported because we need those entities to be successful. And so we also recognize that the reporting requirements may be cumbersome. And we don't expect folks to be experts, but if the partnerships happen, we will make sure to the extent that we can to help in supporting. But I want to qualify that as well. It's important that entities partner with other agencies when they can, and that's why that collaboration component is there. And we've seen that happen often. So they may partner with another agency that's strong in fiscal management or in the reporting or et cetera, so that they have a stronger proposal. Because if we, with this level of money, and if we have to extend a whole lot of extra help, it may be more difficult for us to be successful in implementing funds use.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. And this second question is actually for you, Manager Hager, and Deputy Manager Johnson, if you're able to answer as well. But the question is, can folks still submit proposals? And if you can speak just a bit to whatever requirements there might be for submitting those proposals, that would be helpful.
Well, I will start out for the county. Our commissioners will have conversations at our March work session to discuss next steps on how we will proceed. As Deputy Manager Johnson shared, City Council is looking at 70 some proposals that were submitted. Some of those are also seeking support from the county. So both governing bodies have to go through the process and determine which ones they will fund. For the county, it is a decision also from an initial prioritization where they desire to focus their funding. With that, once the board refines those categories, for instance, I shared about broadband, and we know that is one. We will do an RFP and we will request bids for entities to help us in that space. And there are many others categories that I know that will happen. Youth-related entities, I'm sure will also have opportunities as our board desires to support youth initiatives. There were many other areas as well that are priorities, but I'll stop there and let Bertha pick up.
Thank you. So as I said earlier, on our website, we have the email address, arp@durhamnc.gov. We are accepting, I wouldn't say we're accepting official proposals because the original process or the first process was an application, but we are submitting feedback where we are hearing from folks who have ideas about how the funding should be prioritized. And that is very helpful as our city council looks through those proposals. And if there are lots of ideas around a particular area that they do not see in the proposals that have been submitted, or they want to expand upon those in the second round, then that is information we will share with them as we move to the next round. I don't anticipate our city council allocating all of the funding in this first round. As a matter of fact, they have said that they do not wish to use all of the funding in this first round. So, we are not accepting, official applications because that is a different system, but we are accepting any ideas, completion of survey ideas that you have for us. Please send those to us, and we are capturing those, and we will be compiling those and sharing them with our elected officials. Again, because we haven't designed the second process, so we don't have an application yet.
We do have a couple of questions from folks related specifically to DPS, but I did want to ask a question of the city and county that relates up to accountability of these funds. The question for Manager Hager and Deputy Manager Johnson is, what is in place to ensure accountability of funds, and how will we know if they are having the intended impact?
That's a great question. I'll start out. I think one of the main issues is making sure that when proposals are selected, that they are selected based on evidence-based findings, that it's been done before. Sometimes one can test an effort and see if it comes to fruition as planned, but this is one of those times that, although there may be some new territory that you're delving into, you want to support proposals that do have evidence-based support, whether it's happened in another community or something that you've already done and you're trying to expand. So when proposals are developed, they should have goals, objectives, and performance measures at the beginning of that process. And from that point, we would measure to see if they are on point or not. And from that standpoint, that's an approach that we would use. And I'm sure Bertha will have additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say exactly. I mean, one of the reasons our application is 5 pages, because we asked those very questions, like who will be responsible for tracking the performance metrics. We also are requiring, in our agreements will require quarterly reporting. We also want to make sure that the organizations can collect the data that they said they're going to use to report on their metrics. And as Claudia mentioned earlier, you may have to partner with a fiscal sponsor, someone who has demonstrated the ability to manage a large grant. Some proposals have requested large amounts of funding and may have never received a grant. And we don't want to arbitrarily eliminate, new folks from, getting funding. We do have to be responsible for this funding to the U.S. Treasury. And so what would happen is if we are not responsible and these funds are deemed ineligible use, then the city of Durham and Durham County will be responsible for paying back these funds. And so we want to make sure on the front end, as Claudia said, that we're asking and we're requesting the information we need to feel comfortable in these organizations getting these funds. And in some cases, the proposals may not get all of the funding that they request if they can't demonstrate the ability to be accountable to those funds in terms of collecting the data or having a fiscal sponsor who has demonstrated their ability to do this. And we've done this with some of our other proposals. I mean, remember, we're not just just getting in this game. We've done grants for many, many years in both organizations. And so we have a track record for, ensuring that there's compliance and there's follow-up. And there are some things, as Claudia said, may have not been done before. We just got to do due diligence on the front end and make sure that those organizations that we fund can be accountable to us, because we're accountable to the U.S. Treasury, if you've heard earlier, for making sure that we report back the information that's needed for us to be deemed, for those funding allocations to be deemed eligible.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you so much. A couple of other questions that we received also want to focus a bit on specific populations within Durham. One of the questions received was focusing on how our Latinx community has been engaged in this process and what routes there are for folks to actually provide feedback, especially when thinking about folks who either don't have access to the same technology channels that are being used. So yeah, if you can speak a little bit more to how folks from different communities are actually being engaged in this particular process and also being asked for feedback.
I guess any questions to me?
I believe those questions were for the city and the county.
Okay.
Paul, one of your questions though is going to be focusing on youth
Sure.
voice in the process and feedback.
So I would start out by saying that, we actually translated everything that we did in Spanish. We also reached out to specific folks to be partners engaging in the community because we know the relationships they have. We received multiple proposals that were specifically for the Latinx community. One focused on mental health, the one I mentioned earlier, but several proposals. And again, the list is out there. But we definitely were intentional about reaching out to that particular community, as we do in all of our engagement. So we have a lot of, again, we've been doing this for a while, not with this funding, but with our own funding, with the taxpayers' funding, giving grants to organizations, and we have those relationships, particularly through our PB process. Most of you are familiar with that. We have a steering committee that's very diverse, and we have folks who are engagement ambassadors in our community out getting feedback for us. And so we use that feedback in this process as well.
For us, I would say our primary engagement occurred with the joint conversations with the city. And as Bertha said, they took leadership in facilitating the translators. We also were conscious of our residents that may have disabilities with vision or hearing impairment. So we tried our best to cover as best we could, because Durham is diverse, and it's what we do in our normal engagement.
Thank you. And the question we had for DPS is, what is DPS doing to ensure youth voice is heard in funding priorities? I think folks are thinking specifically about the 12 million that is quote unquote left over, I guess, from what has already been spent. So if you can speak to that a bit, that would be great.
Yes, in regards to that, that $12 million that's available is for the purpose of the schools to work with their school improvement teams who work with students on a daily basis. There are a lot of things we have listened to in regards to students, in regards to the outdoor learning centers. That was a loud voice that came from students in the beginning. From that to we do hear from students in regards to athletics, right? In regards to that opportunity to open up those extracurricular activities at the schools. So it's really working through their school principal to find out what their needs are. The staffs are working diligently to find out how we can better serve our students in that regard. And, one of the other things we have to understand with education funding is most of our elementary schools, all but 5, get additional Title I funding on an annual basis. So with those funds, with the additional funds for the opportunity with these ESSER funds that we receive, we have an abundant amount of money. I think principals and schools have been trying to just get back into school this year, find out what the needs are for the purpose of making next year a better transition as the school year starts.
Thank you. And one of the things that the partners who worked to put this event on, Village of Wisdom, Student U, but as well as DPS has heard, is the toll that this entire pandemic has had on our entire community, but also our students. And so one of the questions was asking specifically about how funds either have been used to help students cope through different mental health issues, but also to address, like, before we head further into the mental health crisis that is on the horizon. And that question can be answered by DPS, but if there are also any city or county services that have been used to address youth mental health, we'd love to hear that as well.
So we have 14 mental health coordinators that are working in the schools. The biggest problem we have currently is that the county, the city, and all school districts across the state are vying for the same individuals. And that has put an extra burden on being able to get the number of students, the number of counselors and mental health counselors that we need in our schools. One of the things I did note that I'll speak to of the Q&A was how many students is it per counselor, and is that enough? We had prior to COVID, we had a ratio of 1 counselor for every 290 students. With COVID, it brought it down to closer to 1 to 256. So it made a remarkable difference in regards to the counselors that we needed to ensure that we had better support for our students. The recommended is 1 to 250. So to that, we would have to maintain the 14 that we have and then add a few more to get us under that 1 to 250 level. That is the normal standard across the state or across the country for counselors to students.
Thank you. And I see that Deputy Manager Johnson has included a link to Durham Youth Works program. Manager Hager, did you have a response to that question?
I was just going to say that our Board of Commissioners, as well as staff, are acutely aware and concerned about the investments required for mental health, behavioral health services for our students and their families. We know this pandemic has impacted both. We have increased additional dollars to support mental health services using local dollars as well as the CARES funding. And we anticipate the board in their deliberations in upcoming months will also allocate additional funds, whether it is from ARPA dollars or from local dollars to help families during this period.
And I'll just add one more thing. One of the things we were hoping for in this past general session was that the General Assembly would look at the Leandro funding needs of this state. And in that are critical positions, and counselors are one of those major positions that we're looking for from the state.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to say thank you to everyone who was able to join us this evening.